Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming here today in celebration of Saskatchewan Library Week. I am very excited to introduce renowned author Cliff Burns, who will be presenting on telling stories in a post-truth era. Cliff Burns has been a professional author since 1985 and has written 16 books and published scores of short stories, essays, poems, and publications and anthologies around the world. In 1990, he founded his own publishing company, Black Dog Press, and in words of critic and academic Robert Runt, Cliff Burns is a literary pioneer going independent 2 decades before it became fashionable. For Burns, it was never about the money. It's always been about artistic integrity and connecting with his audience. So without further ado, I'm super excited to have Cliff here. And remember, there's treats down below, coffee, tea, juice, iced tea. And if you want to check out some of his books or even his VHS tape, you're welcome to do so. So thank you all. And to thank Cliff for coming. We're going to be giving him a reusable mug because we've given him too many bags. So we're on mug duty now.
Thank you. My thanks to Colin and the North Battleford Library for inviting me here tonight. This is actually the 3rd time I've been asked to speak during Saskatchewan Library Week, which rather begs the question, haven't you had enough? As noted in a previous presentation, I have a long, happy relationship with libraries, and so teasing aside, I'm delighted to be back once again sharing a few notions and ideas with you, and hopefully prompting some discussion and sober second thought. So, let's get on with it. I am a professional liar. Not only that, I am a far more proficient and unrepentant liar than any bent politician or morally dissolute corporate flack. My falsehoods are conscious, considered, intentional, and I offer no apologies for doing a first-rate job at making stuff up. I've been at it nearly 40 years now, and in that time, I've learned how to push folks' emotional buttons as I tell them my tall tales. I know every trick in the book, and I'll use them to bewitch my readers, draw them into my topsy-turvy universe, convince them that what they're experiencing is very, very real. One of the tricks I've mastered is drawing from some element of my life and working it into the narrative. It can be the smallest snippet, like when an owner discovers his car has been burgled and sees that inexplicably the thieves have taken the lighter from the dashboard, leaving a small empty hole. Something similar happened to a friend of mine, and when he told me about it, both of us stared at each other, baffled. What kind of person would do such a thing? What purpose would it serve? But bits like that are perfect for creating verisimilitude, a false reality, but an entirely convincing one. And to me, that's what it's all about. Establishing and maintaining plausibility, suspending disbelief right down to the period after the final word of the last paragraph or stanza of everything I write. I will do whatever is necessary, use all the talent and resources at my disposal to fool you into thinking the people in my stories exist, that they're as real and authentic as your neighbors or close friends. And if I can make readers care about those entirely made-up characters, laugh and cry with them, well then, I've done my job, haven't I? That's when mere craftsmanship becomes art with a capital A. So yes, I'll borrow a bit here and there from my life, reframe a certain funny anecdote, use pieces of me to provide some color and backdrop to my work. As far as I'm concerned, life's little embarrassments and humiliations provide material that can be mined for years afterward. But a word of caution. Don't steal too much from your life, and please don't attempt to use yourself as the inspiration for any of your major players. That way lies narcissism. an unhealthy fixation on your navel that will produce little of any value. Because the challenge isn't in writing about yourself, it's creating totally new characters that may bear some relationship or resemblance to you and the people you know, but exist wholly outside the confines of your mind, inhabiting their own skins, often cursing their existence just like the rest of us poor sods. Some idiot is purported to have said, "We all have a book inside us." This is a particularly moronic statement that can be easily disproved with the assistance of a certified lab technician and a functioning X-ray machine. The truth is, we've all observed or participated in any number of hilarious or harrowing incidents, but that doesn't constitute a reason for sitting down and spending long hours, weeks, and months reliving your life from infancy to the present day, a blow-by-blow account of every indignity you've ever suffered and triumph you've ever managed to pull off. Some of us, no question, are books waiting to be written, with a thrilling past involving escape from certain death, hiding from pursuers in a dreamlike forest, fighting for survival as the net grows ever tighter, which happens to be the essential plotline of Diamonds of the Night, a Czech Nouveau film I recently watched and highly recommend. No, your life, when viewed in its totality, is probably not worthy of the Karl Ove Knausgaard treatment. 6 thick volumes, a fictionalized memoir you could stun a mastodon with. Speaking candidly, a book based on my time on this earth would probably amount to little more than a pamphlet. What can I say? I've taken Flaubert's dictum to heart, to be steady and well-ordered in my life so I can be fierce and original in my work. For the record, Flaubert was a genius, an innovator, and literary perfectionist, but I'm guessing not the most interesting guy to hang out with. Who else would commend boredom and routine, the kind of existence worthy of a pine cone or a particularly slow-witted possum? But returning to my point, moments of high drama and low comedy aside, most people's lives are uniformly mundane and homogeneous. Not all of us can jet off to the Middle East to help solve a looming political crisis or frame our memories in such a way that generations of readers gain insights into how we lived and the state of the world around us during that era. Perhaps that's just as well. After all, I think most of you are probably familiar with the words of that ancient Chinese curse, "May you live in interesting times." If the daily grind seems rather dull and colorless, well, at least we have peace and security. And these days, with all the crises and strife and misery out there, that's no small thing. We might not be entirely happy or satisfied with our lot, but at least we live in hope. There are many parts of this planet where hope is a luxury few can afford. And that truly is a crime against humanity. And now a few thoughts on the subjects of autobiography, creative nonfiction, documentary filmmaking, forest sprites, and other imaginary creatures. Folks, the moment you hear someone say, "This is a true story," you know they're lying. Because truth is in the eye of the beholder, and not only that, we regard the rest of the world through all sorts of emotional filters based on a lifetime of experiences, our mental hardware and software more complicated and inexplicable than anything known in the entire universe. Each of us has an entirely different perspective on the world around us, so how in the name of God are we supposed to agree on what constitutes reality, or God for that matter? It's something Socrates brought to our attention nearly 2,500 years ago in his famous dialogues with his students, a number of which were written down by his star pupil, Plato. Socrates authored no texts we know of, so we owe thanks to Plato and Xenophon for preserving what little we have. Socrates' tactic was to mercilessly grill his charges, tearing down their assumptions one by one, while reminding them of the narrowness of their views, the biases and mental blinders constraining them. Socrates was the role model for critical thinkers, refusing to compromise his ethics or take anything at face value, constantly analyzing and reassessing, putting knowledge and logic to the test, never accepting what passes for conventional wisdom. Would that we were all as diligent at marshalling our thoughts, carefully appraising the evidence and coming to conclusions that might just possibly run counter to our beliefs, and then be willing to change our minds. Like the song says, what a wonderful world that would be. But let's be honest, before we deal with what passes for reality, we need to take a closer look at ourselves. What makes us think the way we do, how we view the world, has been distorted, whether we know it or not, by time, brain chemistry, and in some cases, trauma. Are we credible witnesses of our own lives? Are we the people we believe ourselves to be? We all want to be the heroes in our life stories, but sometimes we fall short, trying with all our hearts to be good and decent, but still capable of cowardly, despicable acts. And so, on occasion, we're forced to edit our experiences and memories, rationalizing our worst behavior, excusing it for the sake of a vigilant conscience. Instead of an accurate recollection of events, we concoct a well-told tale, a version of the episode that emphasizes our side of the story, doling out undeserving blame to others, evading culpability like an enraged skunk. Studies have shown that even our clearest memories, those we believe most integral to our development, are inexact, confused, yet they invariably coalesce into what passes for a truth we cling to with our teeth and fingernails, refusing to countenance any alternative version or competing point of view. Our entire identity rides on it. In a very real sense, we are the story we tell ourselves, one in which we are writer, director, and star. We confuse timelines, transpose or omit other participants, do our best to avoid blame, and be forced to assume the role of black-hatted villain. And this is why I take issue with autobiographies, memoirs, and so-called creative nonfiction. As far as I'm concerned, any book purporting to be autobiographical should be forced to include an asterisk, the disclaimer below reading, not to be confused with real life, more like a best guess. All I need for proof is to bring up some episode from our family's past with my mother or sisters and then sit back and marvel at how much their recollections differ from mine. Who's right? Is it possible it's all of us? Or none? I don't know about you, but I'm always astonished when I read a memoir and it's so amazingly detailed and fleshed out, the author's reminiscences boasting a crispness and clarity that is nothing less than, completely unbelievable. Events recalled from decades past where the dialogue is faithfully reconstructed, the backdrops and setting depicted with eidetic perfection. Except it's bullshit. It has to be. Nobody's memory is that perfect. What you're getting is a story, and it might be based on actual events, but it is very much an exercise in subjectivity, a carefully prepared narrative as seen through a very particular set of eyes with a very specific mindset behind them. Parts of it might be accurate, but please be assured a lot of the detail that so impresses us has been added retroactively upon reflection, woven into the text with the same diligence and creativity employed by our finest fiction writers. Because there is no such thing as a reliable narrator, whether that narrator is a real person or is invented as Conrad's Marlowe and Melville's Ishmael. When you pick up the latest mega-selling memoir by some celebrity chef or minor royalty, instead of wondering about the salacious details it might contain, maybe instead think about the things and people that have been deliberately excluded, and not because of objections from lawyers. In Bob Dylan's autobiography, Chronicles, he talks about his ex-wife and longtime muse, but never once mentions her name. Do you think Bob might just possibly be bearing a bit of a grudge? For the record, her name is Sarah Lowndes. They were involved for 12 years and had 3 children together. Personal animosity, shame, petulance. These are all emotional states that can color a person's recollections and perceptions. No author, no human being can resist a chance to settle a score, avenge some ancient slight. My favorite memoirists are the bitchy ones, people employing their caustic wit to eviscerate companions and colleagues, holding back nothing as they pass judgment on others. As long as that same scrutiny isn't directed at them. Narcissists, like certain varieties of frogs, are extremely thin-skinned and highly toxic. Most autobiographies claim to be candid and painfully honest, but I suspect the authors, however devil may care, are still leaving important parts of their past heavily redacted, dark corners they still can't bring themselves to explore. There are things you can't divulge even to your therapist or priest. Crimes and misdemeanors of the heart, a million different varieties of sin, words or actions that have left shameful stains on your soul. The kind of behavior we must avert our eyes from, hardly able to believe it's us doing those things. And so we press delete, or at least try. The best we can usually manage is messing with the focus a bit, blurring wrongdoings, reducing their power over us. Time and denial, the two great healers. We are responsible for everything we do, some semi-famous dude once said, but we are not the same people who did them. Is that the point of view of someone trying to overcome a few minor moral failings, or the skillful maneuvering of a guilty conscience trying to accommodate an unspeakable act? And it's not only autobiography that plays hard and fast with the truth. I regard many non-fiction books, especially those relating to biography and history, with a certain amount of skepticism. What were the author's opinions on their subject matter before commencing their research and writing their tome? Did they have a preconceived idea, a confirmation bias right up there with anything you'll find among the anti-vaxxers? And as for documentaries, well, I love them to death, but I'm also aware someone, the director or producers, has to decide what makes it on screen and what ends up on the cutting room floor. And by their choices, they're consciously framing the narrative for us, imposing a point of view totally obliterating the notion of verite cinema. Even so-called fly-in-the-wall documentaries only pretend to be objective. Viewers are still left to interpret the footage through their own experiences and personal beliefs, each one very different. No, true reality is a hard thing to pin down, especially when each of us is only able to function because of the fictions that define us, the way we see ourselves, those narratives absolutely essential to our identity. And that's why we fight so bloody hard to retain them, even when they conflict with what the vast majority of society believes and cause us no end of grief. All the lies that are our lives. I found this quote from John Burnside that seems very apropos. Maybe this is why we tell ourselves stories, in order to work out why we remember some things more than others, why some events live on in the mind, why some faces and voices persist for decades, to be resurrected in the dark by an insomniac who wakes knowing he has lost something on the way, but has no idea what it is. And now, of course, we come to the elephant in the room. I've spent all this time denigrating the notion of reality, poo-pooing objectivity, which puts me in uncomfortably close proximity to those who insist we're living in a post-truth era, where you can't trust anything you see or read. Experts and scientists are fools. There are secret cabals controlling our affairs, and the old traditional or legacy media are compromised, making it necessary to find your own reliable sources of information. Well, let me counter that with some hard truths I hope we can all agree on, regardless of our religion or political leanings. These truths, as the Declaration of Independence asserts, should be self-evident and irrefutable. They better be, or we really are humped. The earth isn't flat. 12 men walked on the moon. Slavery, in all its forms, is abhorrent. Human beings are equally valuable no matter where they live, what they believe, or how they look. Those who profit from society have an obligation to help the less fortunate. And the contrails of jet planes don't cause sterility or make us prone to vote liberal. You want more? Government plays an important role in our lives, including funding and administering social services and doing what's best for the entire electorate rather than just the favored few. The judiciary must remain strong and independent, free from political interference. Democracy is imperiled, portrayed as ineffectual or corrupt by its opponents, many of whom resent any constraints put on their ability to wield influence and enrich themselves at the expense of their fellow citizens. The speed of light is constant, the universe expanding, vaccines save lives, and some folks are smarter than others and become experts in their chosen field, and yes, a healthy proportion of them must know what they're doing, or this world would have fallen into ruin a long time ago. Oh, and superhero movies universally suck. Can we get some consensus on that at least? Despite what you've heard, post-truth is really just another stupid meme employed by self-interested schemers to make us question structures of governance and smear public servants to the extent that it's getting difficult to convince quality people to run for office because they fear the backlash and animosity they'll eventually and inevitably face. The result is we find ourselves increasingly compelled to elect approved, vetted candidates, men and women either drawn from the business class or boasting the right connections. Bland middle managers and unimaginative technocrats, anxious to secure their privilege and preserve the status quo. These people are not our peers, nor do they have the slightest inkling of what ordinary working class citizens endure on a daily basis, the ongoing struggle to make ends meet and help our kids get a head start on life. Social media has wreaked havoc in our society, and the emergence of artificial intelligence will only exacerbate that situation, flooding us with more headlines and sound bites and deep fakes than we can absorb, each of them curated so they appeal to our tastes and preferences, providing fodder for our views, no matter how ridiculous or inflammatory. There is talk of an impending mass information chaos, and if you think sifting through the chaff to find a grain of truth is difficult now, the situation is about to become far, far worse. It's called Internet 3.0, and it's already here, a brash new technology that might be a game changer, a tipping point, because we will be so inundated by the craziness masquerading as information, it will be impossible for us to escape the mental loops and logic traps lying in wait for us. A post-truth world loudly disavows any notion of an intelligentsia and gives short shrift to academics. We'd all like to see an internet that is content neutral, but not if that means giving equal credence to everyone, the whack jobs granted the same stature as experts, and thus gaining a disproportionate amount of influence, particularly in the political and social spheres. I recently finished reading Stephen Brill's The Death of Truth, and can recommend it as an excellent, cogent deep dive into how false news and bogus information gained undeserved credibility, thanks to the insidious reach of social media and the gullible folk out there who believe critical thinking is what happens when you're deliberating over what to watch on Netflix. Brill describes how the recommendation algorithms are weighted so that the sites promoting controversial or unproven points of view gain a higher profile than those adopting a more reasonable stance. It's not about establishing which web page or forum is authentic or credible. It's a purely mercenary process whereby the places with the most engagement or traffic are given prominence by search engines because they create more revenue for the various platforms. And not only that, because the algorithms favor these fringe sites and the angry, paranoid people who tend to seek them out, they're proliferating by leaps and bounds. The message is clear. If you want to attract attention to your favorite pet peeve, Don't come across as dull and scholarly. No, shout and scream and fulminate until you pull in so many like-minded, aggrieved people to your cause that it begins to feel like a movement, a demographic that believes itself wrongly denied a voice by mainstream media and the elitist ruling class. Confirmation bias reigns. Every rabbit hole you go down reinforces what you already know and makes you madder as you wonder why most people, including immediate friends and relatives, refuse to recognize what a terrible state the world is in and how you and your fellow believers are the only ones who see things clearly and know exactly what needs to be done. When confronted with people holding intractable and unpleasant views, too many of us retreat from our responsibilities as free citizens, keeping our heads down and mouths shut, checking our news feeds every so often and clucking our tongues, fretting about an impending civil war. But that's not the answer. The solution lies in engaging, not folding our tents and conceding the field to the greedy and stupid and short-sighted. Our response should be to resist the dominance of increasingly complex and intelligent machines, the enticements of mass technology, mass communication, mass insanity. Frustrate the algorithms, resist clickbait, and when it comes to the major issues, don't just scan the bloody headlines. Take the time to inform yourself, at least acquire some familiarity with the terminology being employed. The truth is out there, but you have to dig for it. And your local library, it seems to me, is an excellent place to start. A building filled with books, magazine articles, informational DVDs, everything you require for a thorough understanding of the world around you is available here, free, yours for the asking. The bad news is you need to read deeply and widely if you hope to learn about weighty subjects like science, history, economics, politics, religion, and so on. It's a slow process, but it's also the kind of in-depth study that serves as a buffer against false information, propaganda, and outright lies. It's essential that you constantly check your sources, discern which are legitimate and which are the product of bad actors, corporate or state-sponsored entities seeking to muddy the waters, poison or stifle debate, push ideological buttons, divide us, make us question authority, erode our sense of trust. And be mindful of the search terms you use. Scientific evidence for vaccines and vaccines kill people will take you to significantly different places, informed by very different mindsets and mentalities. The way you frame your questions determines the quality of the answers you receive. In turn, the way you receive those answers depends on your capacity to recognize your limitations and a willingness to expand your base of knowledge, even if it runs counter to everything you believe. The physicist Neil deGrasse Tyson puts it best. One of the great challenges in this world is knowing enough about a subject to think you're right, but not enough about the subject to know you're wrong. In order to survive, democracy requires participation, and it requires discussion and debate. I don't believe it can remain viable in an atmosphere of mistrust and paranoia, where knowledge and experience count for nothing, and we no longer defer to experts skilled in medicine and science and civic affairs, people educated and trained to perform crucial roles in our society. Indeed, informed, intelligent opinions will be essential as we confront pressing ethical and technological issues surrounding artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, nanotechnology, etc. The bad news is the world is about to become a lot more confusing and complicated, humanity facing dilemmas and circumstances far more dangerous to our species than COVID-19. How we deal with those challenges will determine whether or not our kind will continue to thrive on this planet. Willful ignorance will be the death of us all. refusing to accept the truth despite all the evidence. The problem is, if we don't have any practical understanding of a particular issue, if we're relying more upon opinions than facts, and no, they're not the same thing, then how can we possibly assess the validity or accuracy of what we believe? If you don't know the difference between DNA and a chicken salad sandwich, or can't understand why a medication designed to treat intestinal parasites is useless against a coronavirus, well, maybe it's time to go back to school. One more quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson. A proper skeptic questions what they're unsure of, but recognizes when valid evidence is presented to change their mind. We are, each of us, part of a series of improbabilities, which includes the universe we live in, the planet we inhabit, and the many constituent parts that make us, well, us. Our Earth exists in what is called the Goldilocks zone, just the right distance from the sun to produce life. A little closer, and we'd be an overheated solar oven. Any further away, a snowball. Our very presence here, even the most devout atheist would have to agree, verges on the miraculous. I wonder, could there be a cross-cultural, interpersonal equivalent of a Goldilocks zone, a place where we could all safely meet, a neutral forum in either the real world or virtual, a space where the environment is conducive to real discourse, the different sides assembling in peace, willing to at least entertain the notion that we might not have all the answers or possess a monopoly on the truth. Picture a kind of traditional town square where everyone gathers and is compelled to conduct themselves with a modicum of civility and restraint, exchanging views and then listening to the response, while resisting the urge to check their phone for the 144th time that day. An actual figure, by the way. You might find that scenario too fanciful for words. But then I'm reminded of the trips I used to take with my father-in-law, Ken Harmon. The two of us thrown together for lengthy periods of time without any rancor developing between us. And let me explain, Ken was deeply conservative, a real Hemingway-esque figure, self-made, opinionated, and strong-willed, a cowboy, a pilot, a Navy man. Whereas I am not any of those things. In terms of politics, I'm to the left of Karl Marx, and when it comes to disposition, I have a thermonuclear temper and a particular gift at saying exactly the wrong thing just to see how someone will react. A provocateur, or as some might put it, a shit disturber. Nonetheless, Ken and I genuinely enjoyed traveling together and were somehow able to bridge our differences, mainly by sharing a love of history in the West, but also observing an unspoken gentleman's agreement whereby we would avoid certain topics or agree to disagree when they happened to crop up. I gotta tell you, there's no room for bad blood or hurt feelings in the cab of a pickup truck. You quickly learn to let things slide and tolerate your traveling companion's quirks, the less savory aspects of their character. In effect, Ken and I found our Goldilocks zone. And I guess the lesson here is we don't have to always get along or live in complete harmony. But for our civilization to survive, we have to learn to listen to each other's stories. And no matter how exotic or strange those narratives might seem, recognize that they constitute the soul of another human being, someone valuable and unique and deserving of respect. I titled this presentation, An Honest Liar, and as should be evident by now, I wasn't just referring to myself. Well, liars we may all be, but also honest enough to acknowledge that our flaws define us as much as our good qualities, and none of us is immune to mistakes or outright cruelty. But if we work hard enough at it, become better, smarter people, and if we're very, very lucky, there might still be time to undo the terrible damage we've inflicted on this improbability, this miracle known as planet Earth, and in the process, preserve a future that is recognizably human, democratic, and just. Merci. Thanks very much.